blood, death, and a futile defense. 452 Chinese defend a single warehouse in Shanghai against 20,000 Japanese. This is China's battle of Stalingrad. This is the 800. Hello, welcome to the Pacific War channel, where we cover the entire Asia-Pacific War of 1937 to 1945 and all the major events that led up to it. Before we begin, please smack that like and subscribe button, as it would mean a lot to this small channel. Now it's time for a film review of The 800. If you want to watch this film right now, guess what? It's on YouTube. Link is going to be in the description.
It's free real estate.
Imperial Japan has been at war with China unofficially since 1931, when they began an illegal occupation of Manchuria. Japan has increasingly exploited China's weak situation. There is internal strife, and Chiang Kai-shek, the Generalissimo of the Republic of China, does not have firm control over most of his nation. Chiang Kai-shek is doing everything possible through diplomacy to delay an official war with Japan and to buy time for his military to be properly trained. Select Chinese forces are being trained by German military advisors and outfitted with German equipment. They are China's elite forces. It is 1937. Chinese and Japanese troops exchange fire at the Marco Polo Bridge. Soon, what was a sporadic skirmish escalates into a full-scale battle, and outright war has finally come. To give his nation any chance of survival, Chiang Kai-shek devises a plan. He will reorganize the absolute cream of the crop of his forces, the best officers and soldiers, into an elite division. These forces form the 88th Division. They are all trained by German military advisors and are fully equipped with German weapons. Chiang Kai-shek will send his most elite force to Shanghai to force the Imperial Japanese army to attack him there. Why push the war into Shanghai? Shanghai was specifically chosen to stall the Japanese advance, giving Chiang Kai-shek's government time to move vital industries to the interior, while at the same time attempting to bring sympathetic Western powers to join China's side. You see, inside Shanghai was the Shanghai International Settlement, a neutral zone full of Western nations and industrialists like the British, the French, the Americans, the Germans, and of course, the Japanese. This meant that when the Japanese invaded Shanghai, they had to absolutely make sure they did not bomb, enter, kill any people or property within the neutral zone, or else they might face condemnation from other world powers. This also means that all their actions carried out by the Imperial Japanese Army could be viewed in the neutral zone by residents of it and reported back to their respective countries. A brilliant strategy by Chiang Kai-shek, bottlenecking the Japanese in a delicate region with his best 88th Division to keep them there as long as possible. Similar to the Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans faced many of their numbers of Persians, Chiang Kai-shek's entire plan was to delay the Japanese and win over Western power sympathy. In the movie The 800, director Guan Hu literally plunges you straight into the hellscape that is 1937 Shanghai. The scenery is desaturated gray, burning rubble, ashes, corpses, and honestly, it's very reminiscent of the setting for the Enemy at the Gates film. I believe the director was influenced heavily by Enemy at the Gates and the Battle of Stalingrad. Hell, he's not the only one. Peter Harmsen's Shanghai 1937 Stalingrad on the Yangtze very much describes the Second Battle of Shanghai as the Battle of Stalingrad in Asia. And you might have noticed it was the title of this episode. By the time this film takes place, the 88th Regiment has almost completely been obliterated after 3 hard months of war with the Imperial Japanese Army. Shanghai is under siege, and the Japanese are beginning to encircle the remaining Chinese military. Chiang Kai-shek is forced to order the remaining forces in Shanghai to retreat west, but he needs more time to do so. He orders a regiment of the 88th Division to make a suicidal last stand at a fortified position to give the rest of his military a chance to retreat. They will defend a single warehouse, known as the Sihang Warehouse, lying beside the Zhujiao Creek on the other side of the neutral zone. Lieutenant Colonel Xie Jinyuan of the 524th Regiment of the remaining 88th Division will lead 452 men to defend the Sihang Warehouse against a force of 20,000 Japanese. Xie Jinyuan named the defenders the 800, not wanting to reveal their true numbers to the Japanese. This information was told to a girl guide named Yang Humin, who paraded it around to the public in a form of propaganda. Yang Humin was a real person, a courageous girl who did heroic acts during the Battle of Shanghai, and later went on overseas to raise support for China's struggle against Japan. What makes this film so striking for the audience is the contrast between the neutral zone and the war zone, literally divided by just the Zhuao Creek. On one side, in the neutral zone, there are vibrant colors, neon lights, casinos, parades, parties, tons of food and luxury, literally like some kind of Las Vegas. And on the other side, there is no color, just saturated gray, rubble, ashes, corpses, and Chinese and Japanese soldiers fighting street to street in brutal warfare. Often at night, the Chinese soldiers look on in amazement at the dazzling lights and people living within the neutral zone, while they live in an absolute hell, fighting for a single warehouse for their lives. You get many scenes showing civilians in the neutral zone enjoying the high life, eating at restaurants, playing in casinos, smoking cigars, drinking champagne, while watching these dirty, under-equipped, poor Chinese soldiers fighting every day to defend a single beaten-down warehouse. The Westerners at the beginning are shown to be so unsympathetic to the plight of the Chinese soldiers, they actually bet on how long the Chinese will hold out, some thinking only 3 hours. Typical of Chinese war cinema, this movie is jam-packed with scenes of self-sacrifice of Chinese soldiers during the war. There is literally a scene where Chinese soldiers jump off the Sihang Warehouse one by one with bags of grenades to suicide bomb Japanese positions, as the neutral zone civilians watch in absolute horror. Before you roll your eyes, please take note that the National Revolutionary Army of China had what was called Dare to Die Corps, effectively suicide squads, and these suicide squads saw actions in many battles, such as at the Shanghai Revolution, the Warlord era, World War II, and notably at the Battle of Chuarzhuang. Suicide squads would perform acts like strapping themselves with grenade vests and jumping under tanks. And yes, a single Chinese soldier was reported to detonate a grenade vest, killing 20 Japanese soldiers at the battle for Sihang Warehouse, so this really did happen. The movie is full of remarkable real stories, such as when a giant Nazi flag was used to cover Chinese and some Germans moving a phone line cable across a bridge over the Zhuao Creek as Japanese sharpshooters tried to gun them down. Many Chinese runners continue to grab at the cable to get it across and are shot dead, but the Japanese can't afford to hit any Germans, as they are allied. I think a major reason the Nazi flag scene is shown in this film is to give a nod to the efforts of John Heinrich Detlev Rabe, John Rabe for short, who was a Nazi businessman working in China during this time. He helped document atrocities committed by the Japanese at Nanjing and helped to establish the Nanjing Safety Zone, inspired by the Shanghai Neutral Zone. He used his Nazi Party membership countless times to try and appeal to the Japanese army to not kill people within the neutral zone throughout the war. Rabe witnessed the fighting in Shanghai and, alongside other Germans, tried to help the Chinese as best as they could. Did you ever think you would hear about a Nazi official reporting to the world atrocities committed by the Japanese on China? By the way, it's a sad note to make, but many scholars argue that the extraordinary efforts the Chinese made to defend Shanghai most likely enraged the Japanese army, contributing to the later rape of Nanjing, which occurred directly after this. 800 marks China's post-COVID-19 box office resurrection. Chinese cinema has historically done all it can to avoid glorifying Chiang Kai-shek's Kuomintang nationalist troops during World War II, and instead always favors the glorifying of Mao Zedong's communist forces. Yet, this movie showcases so much highly sensitive stuff. Makes you wonder, how the hell did this get past the Chinese Cinema Censorship Board? This film is a roller coaster of incredible acts of heroism and a futile battle to the death. The Chinese soldiers know their fate, but they also know that their actions could save the lives of thousands, if not the very future of their nation. They need to delay the Japanese as long as possible and do everything they can to win the sympathy of powerful Western nations. Something this film does that is extremely not typical of Chinese war cinema is how it depicts Chiang Kai-shek's Kuomintang Nationalist Revolutionary Army and certain individuals in the film. The film shockingly glorifies the efforts of a Girl Scout named Yang Yumin, who bravely risked her life getting a Chinese Nationalist Party KMT flag to the defenders of the Sihang Warehouse. Hear that again. A woman who famously followed Chiang Kai-shek's government in Taiwan is shown heroically getting a KMT flag to the Sihang Warehouse defenders in a Chinese war film made today. If you watch Chinese war films, you will see how this is rather groundbreaking. And take this next scene, which is also very groundbreaking. There is a scene where the Chinese soldiers, in an attempt to win Western sympathy, hoist up a KMT flag given to them by Yang Yumin on top of the Sihang Warehouse using bamboo poles. They hold a flag-raising ceremony, which historically did occur on October the 29th, 1937. The entire scenery is nothing but desaturated gray color everywhere, with the flag, the KMT flag, bristling bright with color, as the soldiers give it a standard salute and a shoot of their rifles. The Japanese are forced to send 0 fighters to try and shoot down the flag. The Chinese soldiers are literally shot to pieces over and over, trying to keep the KMT flag upright. The KMT flag in a Chinese war film made today. Yeah, they broke some real grounds. Alongside glorifying nationalist soldiers, which is shocking, the movie also portrays the Imperial Japanese soldiers to be just doing their job, rather than the traditional Chinese cinema portrayal of them being, subhuman monsters. It was rather surprising. Now, don't get ahead of yourselves, though. There are clear political messages in this film. There are your typical anti-capitalist tropes, and how the most important qualities you must have are to serve your nation, that being, of course, China. 2 worlds are shown side by side in this film, one blood-soaked with dying soldiers, the other luxurious with Western aristocrats who merely watch the other side struggle. The Chinese inside the neutral zone are depicted countless times of having to choose between, being safe or fighting and dying for their nation. The obvious show loyalty to China trope is played out here, but I would argue it's done much more respectfully than I've, seen in previous Chinese war films. The film is getting a lot of flack from Western critics for the lack of depth for individual characters, the main protagonist being a 13-year-old Zhao Hubei and his brother Guan Hu. There is, of course, a full cast of very differing characters, all meeting the standards of any war film. We have a farmer, a worn-out veteran, an intellectual, a photographer, and etc. It seems as though a lot of the Western critics don't really seem to understand that in Chinese war films there's less emphasis placed on the individual and it's more of the collective. So I really think they're out of their depth when they're making these critiques about the film. And saying that, I do not want to spoil any more of this film than I already have. But I assure you that if you like gruesome, realistic looks into the horrors of war, boy, this is the film for you. The sniper POV shots are arguably the best I've ever seen in cinema. Yeah, better than Enemy at the Gates sometimes. I mean, they even show the air resistance when shooting with no slowing down of the frame rates. It looks awesome. The only way to describe it is how you're sniping people in a Battlefield game. It's exactly like that. It's done very well. I think this movie is, it's worth your time. Is it a masterpiece? No, not by any measure, but it's a great film. And it's absolutely making me excited for the future of Chinese cinema. I really hoped you enjoyed this film review. Please leave a like, subscribe, and comment. I am dying for comments on my videos, I'm telling you, and the algorithm does not have any mercy for small history channels. The big channels certainly have a monopoly right now, so anything you can do, it really does help me. This has been the Pacific War Channel, over and out.